friends, to Making Disciples. My name is Cris Rogers, and I am your host. So lovely to spend this time with you today. I hope you're doing all right. I hope you're having a good week. I hope that you're seeing God at work in your life. It's really good to reflect on maybe how have you seen God at work this week? Who have you seen God at work through this week? Is there something that God has been up to that actually, if you stopped, went a bit slower, you might see and notice that He is doing that He is at work? Well, welcome. It's really good. I encourage you to take stock and to say, He's God at work around me this week, because He is. He totally is. Now, today's episode, I've entitled it Reconstruction. We did an episode last year on deconstruction, and wanted to help those who maybe were struggling having deconstructed their faith. Deconstruction is the title or the name that people have given to this process where people have been really giving up on faith and saying, look, I don't know if I believe everything that I've been told, and I'm going to kind of take it apart. And friends, it's really sad, because a lot of the people I know that go through this process of deconstruction end up doing it sometimes in a very unwise way, and actually leave themselves in such a mess that have took the whole thing so apart they have no idea anymore how to put it back together again. And I kind of like it like a Lego kit. Anybody plays, plays with Lego? That's not the right word, is it? Builds with Lego. Kids play, adults build. It's different. If you have a Lego kit and you build that Lego kit, and say you built it into a castle, there's times when you can take that apart into 5 pieces, 5 chunks, and you can then put it back together. But if you take it completely apart, all of the pieces, and then you have no manual to put it back together, you can be stuck. Like, I don't know what this is meant to even look like anymore. I'm giving up. And what often happens with people, they deconstruct their faith so much, they give up on so much of their historical faith that they don't know how to put it back together again. And the thing about deconstruction is this. Actually, many of us, we may need to deconstruct. We may have grown up in Christianity, in the Christian faith, and we've never questioned it. We've just took it for what it was. And now you're looking at it as an adult going, I don't know if I do believe all of this that I've been given. Well, actually, there's a maturing that can happen in us as we analyse and look at our faith and say, actually, which of these pieces do I hold on to? Now, that's not me saying give up. It's good to give up on anything. It's totally not. I'm just aware that some of us may have been through a version of Christianity that once you look at all of it together, you realise what it adds up to doesn't make sense. The God at the end that you're left with is not a loving and compassionate God, but a very angry God or something like that. So I can see why people deconstruct, why people start pulling their faith apart, wanting to look at it and maybe rebuild it. So that was an episode we did last year on deconstruction, and I know that was super helpful for some of you that are supporting friends who are deconstructing, because it can be a really scary time. It can be a scary time for them, and it can be a scary time for us. When you're seeing somebody you love, friend or a family member, deconstructing, we can panic. We think they're giving up on everything, and we think we're going to lose them. They're not going to be who they once were. Well, actually, deconstruction is a healthy process if done right. So in today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about reconstruction. How do we go about reconstructing our faith after doubt, or after something that we have seen in the Christian faith has left us feeling shaken? How do we reconstruct? So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, before we go any further, we have that little jingle. Lent is fast approaching. I would love it if you might petition your church leader and say, hey, Lent's coming. Why don't we as a church use the Making Disciples workbook, the assessment tool and the workbook, and actually use it to look at our faith and kind of analyze how we are doing with our faith. Lent is a great season to look at yourself and say, am I actually becoming the disciple that God has called me to? So please, I'd love it if you might say to your church leader, hey, could we do this? Secondly, a really helpful book that we produced a few years ago for Lent called Apprentice to Jesus, and it's 40 days walking in the way of Jesus. Fits beautifully into Lent, something every day for you to think about and reflect on in Lent. So I'd love to just encourage you. That's one of those books that you can keep coming back to and keep coming back to and keep coming back to. If you want to get a copy of that, hey, there's a link in the show notes to be able to go and pick up a copy of Apprentice to Jesus. Let us jump in now then as we talk about how do we reconstruct our faith after it's been shaken. So yeah, let's talk about this then. Reconstruction of faith. And I was just doing some thinking a little while ago before we start recording, just about Bible passages, where to start with this. Rather than just coming in with some thoughts. What does the Bible have to say? And there's so much in the Bible around the helpful passages on rebuilding faith after doubt. Just a few that came to mind on Mark 9:14-24 is the story of the father whose son is possessed, and Jesus turns to this man and says, everything is possible for one who believes. The father exclaims, I believe, help me with my unbelief. I believe, but help me with my unbelief. That is the awareness that there is a mixedness inside of us. I believe this, but also there's bits I'm struggling with. And, I love the honesty there of this guy. I believe, but, help me with the bits that I don't believe. I thought that was really interesting. John 20:24-29. It's the story of Jesus appearing to doubting Thomas. I don't really like the fact we call him doubting Thomas, because the poor guy has some of the strongest affirmations of faith in the Gospel of John. Yet we remember the moment he doubts. And, it's in that doubting that, Jesus comes to him, and the risen Jesus allows him to touch the wounds. And Jesus says this, do not doubt, but believe. He commands faith to kind of well up in him. I love that. And there have been times in my life when I've actually said to myself, Chris, come on, don't doubt, believe. Step out in belief. Other passages that came to mind, Luke 24:36-49, and Jesus appears after the resurrection to the disciples. They're frightened. They see him. They think he's a ghost. And he invites them to touch and see him. And he invites them to eat with him. And he reminds them of the scriptures about how the Messiah would suffer and have to rise from the dead. So he helps resolve their doubt by saying, reach out, touch me. There's something in this rebuilding of faith, the reconstruction of our faith, when we think that faith in Jesus now is a ghost. It's gone. It's not what I thought it was. Reach out, because Jesus wants you to touch him and encounter him. James chapter 1 verses 2-6, James encourages believers to let testing and doubts lead to perseverance and maturity. And the trials that we go through, the doubts that we might go through, the testing, rather than allowing it to lead to the lack of faith, allow it to become maturity and perseverance in Jesus. So just some passages that came to mind. So reconstruction, or the rebuilding of faith after a faith crisis, what is it? Well, you could say this: reconstruction doesn't mean going back to the exact same faith in the same way that it was previously. It may be that there's a reason, a very, very good reason why you have doubted your faith. You've seen something, you've heard something, you've experienced something that has made you question. So reconstruction doesn't mean going back to the exact same faith that you had previously. You are going to be rebuilding, because you are now a different person. You have different experiences. You understand things maybe differently, seeing things differently, maturing in different ways. So therefore, your faith may not look the same. It may look very different. And reconstruction refers more to finding meaning, purpose, and faith again after this period of doubt. Finding meaning, finding purpose, finding faith again. So in reconstruction, you're not going to the old stuff. You're finding new things that is inspiring you of speaking into your life. One of the things that I get quite worried about when I talk to people about deconstruction and reconstruction is that there's a danger that people throw the baby out with the bathwater. Baby Jesus has gone with the bathwater. And we need to be careful. What's the difference between the baby and the bathwater? Well, there you've got Jesus, and the bathwater is all the religion and the stuff that we put around it. Be careful that we don't end up getting rid of Jesus when actually the problem is religiosity, is the religious structures that maybe we have created. And that's what we need to be analysing, is everything that's around it, the trappings around it, rather than Jesus himself. So I want to talk about a few things. I want to just introduce this a little bit more, just in terms of expectations. I want to talk about recognising the emotional component of this, and I want us to talk about something I'm calling so what? So rebuilding your spiritual foundation, seeking out healthy communities, and continuing the journey. So what do we do next? So let's just talk about the introduction here, just as we kind of step into this. I want to just recap this thought that there are many reasons why people experience deconstruction. It has been my experience that those people tend to be people that have been heavily controlled in the past by a religious community, or the version of Christianity is very controlling, or they've been harmed by somebody within the religious community, or what they have been told has been a version of Christianity that is either super liberal, doesn't stack up, or super conservative and is just all about the law. And there's a way in the middle, the Jesus way. So there are reasons why we deconstruct, and it's important to acknowledge those. And this episode's focus is more on this reconstruction, the rebuilding side. So if you are in deconstruction mode, you may want to go back and listen to that episode that we produced last year. And that for some people, leaving their faith behind, it can be the right choice for a short season, for a time, to create a gap, to sense what you are missing, because there's a danger that we don't realise the good that we have got until it's no longer there. And it may be for some people to have a breathing season where you step out to step back in, where you can see, actually, this is what I'm missing, and I do want to reconstruct. And making sure that you are stepping into this reconstruction for the kind of the right reasons, something you are wanting to do. And this deconstruction for many of us, it can happen in big ways and it can happen in small ways. It can happen in big seismic shifts. Everything feels like it's falling apart. Actually, for some of us, deconstruction happens more in the small foundation shakes. Those small ways that when a leader fails, moral failure in a church leader, or something that's been taught to you, you realise that doesn't stack up, and these small shakes can happen. Those small shakes can just be as difficult as the big ones for us, because we have to work out what do we do with this. So if you have gone through big shifts or small shifts, it actually all can be quite difficult, because those small shifts can leave us with just as much doubt and confusion. So I want to recognise the emotional component of all of this reconstruction as we think about it, because I want to validate that this can be incredibly emotionally difficult process. We can be very, very exhausted, emotionally exhausted through this process, as you're having to re-engage with her, or re-engage with things from childhood, re-engage with the faith, re-engage with what you've been taught. The things that you've been taught may be attached to things that have been painful. So please be emotionally aware and take care of yourself in this. some of those feelings that you have of grief, of loss, of betrayal, of anger, confusion, they're important feelings in reconstruction that you need to engage with. Because if you are grieving or if you are angry, then you are going to deal with the reconstruction in a way that's potentially not going to lead you to fruitfulness, to health, because you yourself aren't ready for the health. So you end up engaging with faith with something that is there under the surface that will either contaminate how you see what you're looking at, or will contaminate how you respond to what you're reading. So we need to be aware of this emotional component of reconstruction, that actually if you are grieving, if you've got a sense of loss, betrayal, anger, confusion, you may need to talk that through with somebody else who can engage with you on it in a helpful way and not a colluding way. The other is, in reconstruction, it's important to give yourself time and space to work things through. Time to actually work it through. So, how do we therefore go about reconstructing our faith? So, rebuilding your spiritual foundations. There's a few things you might want to do as you start to rebuild your spiritual foundations. Take some time to assess what feels meaningful or true about your faith that you have had. I was listening to an amazing podcast with a guy who has been, I've listened to him as he's deconstructed his faith. And in the last couple of years, he's been kind of reconstructing, but he's been going very slowly. And he did an episode of their particular podcast in the last year, talking about how he's just got, it's been about 5 years, he's just got himself a copy of the Bible because he's realised that the Bible was always meaningful for him. That actually some of the teachings that he'd heard were very difficult, but actually the scriptures were always meaningful for him. So he's gone back to something that he's realised that was good. Let me not throw that out as part of this process, because actually I do miss scripture. So we assess what feels meaningful or true from your old faith, and then ask what spiritual practices still carry that value for you. So if prayer was something that you always felt was something helpful for you, then I would say is, ask the question, well, what practices carried that value? What did I do that carried that in the past? So it may be that as you assess, you've decided that loving others as yourself is a value that you really held. Like, I loved that in my faith. Then ask the question, well, what spiritual practices could you carry on now that allow you to keep living at that thing that you enjoyed, that you appreciated of your faith? So what spiritual practices still can carry that value for you? The value of loving your neighbour, or prayer, or scripture, what is that? And then I'd say, come on, consider your core values and find things that align with those beliefs that you have. So if you have a key value in your life around loving your neighbour, then find things in faith that align with that for you. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to rebuild some of the foundations with the things that you actually appreciate, that you enjoy, or give you life from the faith that you've had. So rebuild your spiritual foundation. Start putting some of those foundations in that align with what you appreciated and what you want to hold on to. The second thing is then, as part of this rebuilding, will be this: seek out healthy communities. I visited a church. Oh gosh, it must have been just before we planted into East London. It must have been 2009. And I went to visit this church because I was really interested in what they were doing. And I went to visit them, and there must have been 35 people in the room. And it reminded me of a waiting room in a doctor's surgery. It was just full of sick people. And there was no doctor. It was really interesting. There was nobody helping there. They were just all colluding in their sickness. They were all there coughing over each other. So what would happen is they would come and they would talk about all the things that they were struggling with. But there was nobody in that group that was like encouraging. It was nobody kind of going, come on, let's lean towards hope, let's lean towards faith. There was none of that at all. So they were actually quite an unhealthy community. It was not what I thought it was from their website. I thought I'd seen from the outside. Actually, arriving, I found that this was a really unhealthy community. And they were colluding with each other's doubts. And they were colluding in this deconstruction of faith. And what was really sad was I wasn't entirely sure what many of them were left with. Apart from that sense of community, of all deconstructing their faith. Here we had a whole load of people who basically given up on faith. Like, this is a church. This is just really, it was really interesting. Now, for a season, that could be quite interesting to live with, but long term, to rebuild faith and rebuild hope, and to be the people that God wants us to be, that's not going to be a healthy community. So, isolating from others is not going to help you reconstruct your faith. It will exacerbate the issue. Hiding away from others that are going to help you, and spending too much time with those that are also maybe deconstructing or losing faith, it's not going to help you. We've got to get ourselves surrounded by people who are hopeful, who have faith, who want you to have faith, and want to help you find faith that's healthy and good. So go back to the old voices. Can be punishment. Going back to the old voices that you listened to before can be punishment. So finding healthier voices, finding better voices to listen to than the ones you listened to before. So finding voices to listen to that actually are going to build up your life. So it means finding new people, maybe. It might mean finding a new church, finding a new community that you can wrestle with, and they will bring a different perspective, a healthier maybe perspective. So find supportive groups, find supportive people, find resources that you can be encouraged by. Listen to the voices that are going to be raising faith in you, and make sure not to listen to voices that will collude with your doubts, but ones that will find hope for you. And don't isolate and hide away, because that will exacerbate the issue, but lean forward into hearing voices that will build you up. I was chatting to somebody a little while ago, and their faith had been kind of falling apart for a little while, and the way that they handled it was they basically isolated from everyone else around them, and then they were surprised that they were just sinking deeper and deeper into doubt. And when I spoke to them, they just seemed to be very surprised that this season had been going on. I said, well, you've not been around anyone that's going to draw faith out or encourage faith within you. And when I challenged that, they just took a great deal of offence. I was like, I'm trying to offend you. But like, if you are deconstructing your faith, you're filled full of doubts, you don't know what to believe anymore, and you're not surrounding yourself with people who are going to help with that, I can see how you're getting to the place that you're getting to. So surround yourself with healthy people who will help, will answer questions, will wrestle with you, and will pray with you. And then I'd say this, third and final thing in my so would be continuing the journey. For many, this process will take months, if not years, depending on what faith was like for you previously, depending who you are and what you have gone through. So many of us, it will take time to rebuild and to find faith again. And the truth is that returning to faith looks very different for everyone else. I'm aware of a lady that my wife Becky is supporting who was deconstructing her faith, and she decided that the way she was going to rebuild her faith was she was going to read the Gospels, and she was going to find a faith that was built not on any denomination but on Jesus as she found him in the Gospels. And as she did that, she realized she has always had a problem with the incarnation. She's always had a problem with this idea of the Almighty God that moves into the neighborhood to become close to humanity. And she realized, therefore, she has a problem with this idea of a relationship with God. So in reading the Gospels, she's been rebuilding faith, and she's been rebuilding a faith that is very healthy by reading the Gospels. And once a month she'd meet with Becky to kind of debrief with where she was up to. And she's rebuilt a very healthy faith. So it looks different to everyone, doesn't it? But I thought it was a great way of rebuilding faith, of simply saying, I am going to make sure that the foundation of what I believe is found in Jesus and not in all the opinions of other people, but I'm going to hear what Jesus has to say. So the final thing then would be patient and keep exploring what brings purpose and meaning and faith to your life. Explore the things that bring hope to you and your faith. So it's going to take a long time, maybe a process of months and years. Returning to faith looks different for everyone. And be patient and keep exploring what brings purpose and meaning. So there you are, some thoughts on reconstruction of faith. Practically, listening to podcasts like this one will always be helpful, but one-on-one conversations with friends of faith will be helpful. And deconstructing faith and throwing out some of the core foundations of our faith, it's just not going to work. You know, if you throw the Bible out and say, I'm going to have a faith without the Bible, like, the Bible is the solid foundation that God has given us to build from. Same with Jesus, same with prayer. Like, the scriptures will speak about Jesus. Jesus speaks about his teaching. Prayer leads us to relationship with God. You know, can't throw these pieces. Are very difficult to throw them out completely. And still hold on to faith. They're some of the foundation stones, aren't they? So, friends, I hope you find that helpful. I hope you find that encouraging. Now, if you've got friends who are deconstructing, you might want to point them towards this episode, or you yourself might use some of the things we've talked about in the episode, and you may use it to help them, to sit down with them and say, look, let's work out a bit of a route here for you to rebuild faith. Let's work through some of the things that you found difficult in the past, and let's see if we can rebuild faith around a healthy understanding of who God is, what God has done for us, and what that means for the rest of your life. So I pray that's helpful, encouraging, inspiring. Friends, until next time, grace and peace. Have a blessed week, and we will catch up soon.